Welcome to Cybersecurity Today. This is the Week in Review for the week ending Friday, June 14th, 2024. I'm Howard Solomon, contributing reporter on cybersecurity for TechNewsDay.com. In a few minutes, I'll be joined by Terry Cutler, CEO of Cyology Labs, to discuss some of the week's top news. This includes Microsoft and Google's offer to help U.S. rural hospitals tighten their cybersecurity, a report on top network vulnerabilities found by penetration testers, and the latest news on the hacks of Snowflake customers. But before we get to the discussion, here's a quick look at other headlines from the past 7 days. Canadian police arrested 3 people and are searching for another for their alleged involvement in defrauding customers of the Desjardins Credit Union. This follows the theft of data of 9.7 million customers in 2018. Laval, Quebec police said a group used the stolen data to access customer bank accounts and defraud depositors of over $8.9 million. Federal and Quebec privacy commissioners did a joint investigation on this and concluded unnamed bank marketing department employees had stolen data for at least 26 months. The commissioners concluded Desjardins' data protection measures were inadequate and violated federal data privacy law. Police this week didn't explain how the accused people obtained the stolen data that they used. They are not charged with stealing the data. Police in Ukraine arrested a man who allegedly worked for the Conti and Lockbit ransomware gangs, creating code that masked the deployment of the malware. Municipal services at City Hall in Cleveland, Ohio remain closed today following a cyber attack earlier in the week. The city is still trying to restore access to its IT systems. The Toronto District School Board says its IT test environment was recently hit by ransomware. That begs the question, is your test system open to the internet? My Daily Choice, an American online marketplace, is notifying over 89,000 people that some of their personal information was stolen in February from a hosted environment where it stores data. First American Financial, which provides title insurance and other services for the real estate sector, is notifying over 41,000 people that their names and driver's license numbers were stolen last December. Meanwhile, a U.S. insurance group, Progressive Corporation, is notifying some customers that their personal information was stolen by an employee who used another person's identity to beat the company's background checks and get a job. During the employee's 6 months of work handling customer calls, they had access to personal information. Fortinet released security updates this week for devices that run its FortiOS operating system. They fix multiple stack-based buffer overflow vulnerabilities. And Google released 50 security updates for its Pixel smartphones. 7 deal with critical vulnerabilities. One of the vulnerabilities, rated high, may already be exploited. Patches for Pixel phones should automatically be installed, but it doesn't hurt to check if your device is up to date. Joining me now from Montreal is Terry Cutler of Cyology Labs. Hi there.
Hey, Howard, how's it going?
It's going very well. Thank you. Let's start with a report from a company called Vulnerabilities, which makes an automated software-as-a-service penetration testing platform. Full disclosure, Terry's company resells Vulnerabilities services. After looking at penetration test results from 1,200 customers, Vulnerabilities compiled a list of the most common internal network vulnerabilities that could allow an attacker to take advantage of an IT network. On the list were 3 that you might expect: outdated Microsoft Windows systems, Windows servers that weren't patched for old vulnerabilities, and systems within an organization that had the same administrator passwords. We'll get to those in a minute because they weren't the most common holes. The most common hole was leaving systems open to multicast DNS spoofing. First of all, Terry, what is MDNS?
So basically, multicast DNS is basically a protocol within a small network that allows devices to find each other. So let me try to simplify this a little bit. So think of MDNS like a small local phone book, okay, like the yellow pages. So every device has its own phone book that it carries around with it, okay? So when you need a phone number, in this case, it's going to be an IP address, you're first going to check your local book to see if it's there. If not, it's going to go and check a central DNS server, which will be like your main master phone book. But then after that, if you can't find it there either, you're going to yell out to all your neighbors, hey, who here has this network for this name? And the problem here is that any network or sorry, any neighbor, or this is also a device, that knows the number can respond. But this openness allows anybody to answer, including imposters, which will be the spoofing element of this.
Okay, so what's the danger?
There's a couple of things. Because MDNS is susceptible to spoofing attacks, any device on a network can respond to an MDNS query. Obviously, if you have a malicious attacker that's on the network, he can intercept these queries and respond to the IP address of the device. So it allows the attacker to get in the middle of all this and start capturing passwords, credentials, and using modern computing power, it can crack these codes. So that's why we see this often with FTP services. We see clear text going through. So you better start switching from FTP to SFTP for better security.
Okay, how can this hole be plugged?
The biggest thing is if you're not using MDNS, shut it down. Go and disable it. But you better have good network monitoring in place that's monitoring the network to see if anybody else is broadcasting these services so they can actually clean up the environment.
The next major vulnerability was NetBIOS name service spoofing, which is known to network administrators as NBNS. So this is a protocol that's used on internal networks to resolve a domain name system name when a DNS server either doesn't exist or can't be helpful. What's the security impact?
The biggest thing, again, is spoofing. It's where we can get in between the communication and start intercepting the traffic and maybe even manipulating it. Again, NBNS sends out a broadcast to the entire network. And again, any system can respond to these queries with an IP address of its choosing. So the attacker can actually respond to these queries with information that'll help redirect network traffic that's meant for legitimate services to the actual attacker's device. And of course, when the information is going through us, we get to see everything going through. So everything from login credentials, session tokens, maybe even the attacker's devices that are in there. You never know what we're going to see. And of course, if we get access to these credentials, we can start reusing them and getting access to systems, escalate our privileges. And of course, one of the other biggest part is we can be what's called the man in the middle. So we can actually be the guy in the middle of a legitimate communication. And while the network traffic is coming through our network, we can capture, again, passwords and things like that. And we can inject malicious payloads and alter transaction details, just among some other few things we could do.
How do you plug that hole?
Again, if you're not using these services, disable it. Not just that, you might want to also look at your network and see how it's structured. So if you have proper segmentation in place, this will allow limitation of how many devices can broadcast to the entire network, the entire world, as we say. You want to make sure you can limit these things. Make sure you have good network monitoring traffic in place. And you also want to implement great, strong security mechanisms. So everything 2FA, strong encryption. We see a lot of SMB signing problems. Whenever we do these penetration tests, SMB signing is where if one server has to talk to the other guy, it's going to talk encrypted. If it's turned off, it can be intercepted, it can be manipulated. So you want to make sure that all these things are enabled.
The third most common problem that the researchers found was link local multicast name resolution spoofing. LLMNR is an internal network protocol that's also used to resolve a DNS problem. How do attackers take advantage of that?
It can be a similar way to the other two. So when LLMNR sends out a query to resolve a DNS, it's going to broadcast to all the devices on the local network. So obviously, if the attacker's machine is connected, it can intercept these queries. And this can be done using a packet sniffing tools. If you've heard of Wireshark and these other tools, you can capture these packets. Then once we start seeing these packets, now we can say, okay, we're going to start spoofing things here. We're going to start intercepting these queries and we're going to make our own IP address, claiming to be from the requested host. So we're going to start flooding the other guy saying, yeah, it's us. It's us. We're the legit guy. And eventually what's going to happen is we're going to become the man in the middle because we've poisoned the other guy. And when we poisoned it, we now can start capturing confidential information. Again, passwords, session tokens. We can even do credential harvesting. And once we have this information, we can start doing things like pass the hash attacks. Now, just so you know, okay, I'm not talking about the good old college days here, Howard, okay? This is actually an attack where I can log in to another system using their information without ever knowing what the password is. And that's the biggest reason why attackers are staying undetected for 286 days on average.
And again, how do defenders stop this from being abused?
It can be the same thing as the other two. Basically, if you're not using this service, disable it, because spoofing is a real thing. And you can send out a group policy in the Windows environment that'll help lock down that protocol. Again, you also want to make sure you have proper network segmentation, because if attacker gets into the network, at least he can't start traveling wherever you want. It's going to be limited by range. And of course, we want to put in strong authentication methods. Make sure you've got 2FA everywhere, including on the workstation, especially the network administrators. Look at technology like Duo and these other guys that can help protect the local administrator accounts.
Let's move on to the easy exploitable vulnerabilities that this report found. Outdated Windows servers, unpatched servers, and the use of the same administrator password across systems within the same organization. Like, this is 2024 and IT departments still can't get the basics right?
Look, when you have the mindset of who's going to want to hack me, I'm small fish. I mean, it's no wonder small businesses are being hacked all over the place. And here's a news flash for the small business owners out there, okay? Hackers know that you don't have the time, money, or resources to deal with cybersecurity. So that makes you the perfect target. And one of the problems is around resource constraints. So many IT departments don't have big budgets, so they can't hire the top talent. So in these cases, you want to outsource to an outside cybersecurity firm that can help complement what you got. Maybe you might have complex environments. We see this often with hospitals. You want to try and bring in the latest technology, but it can't work with the older stuff. And the older stuff can't load up the proper security measures that it can today. So you're mixed with this complex environment. There's problems with awareness for training. A lot of IT staff aren't fully aware of all the risks of having outdated software and unpatched vulnerabilities can do for you. We see this how many times in the podcast where we're always talking about these companies being breached, all because they didn't put on a patch. Well, they just didn't know about it. And of course, the goal here is to make sure you have a lot of automation in place. There's a lot of tools out there that can help with patch management, with auditing your environment, and look at your policies and procedures. You have a disaster recovery plan, because it's not about a question of if, but when. How fast can you get back up and running?
Okay. News item 2, cybersecurity rescue for American rural hospitals. Hackers have been targeting the healthcare sector in a number of countries, perhaps because it's a sector that doesn't have a history of being a leading industry in cyber defense, and perhaps because attackers believe hospitals are more susceptible to extortion than other sectors. Regardless, this week, 2 major tech companies announced help specifically for American rural hospitals. Google will provide endpoint security advice to rural hospitals and nonprofit organizations at no cost. Eligible organizations can get discounted pricing for Google communication and collaboration tools and security support, and there'll be a pool of funds to help them move to better cyber defense tools. Microsoft is extending its nonprofit program to independent and critical care hospitals and rural emergency hospitals to provide grants and up to a 75% discount on Microsoft security products optimized for smaller organizations. And for participating larger rural hospitals already using eligible Microsoft solutions, Microsoft is providing its most advanced security suite at no additional cost for 1 year. And Microsoft will also provide free cybersecurity assessments and free training for frontline IT staff at eligible rural hospitals throughout the U.S. to improve resiliency to malicious cyber attack. This is tech help in just one country. Should all IT vendors be doing this or more in other countries?
Yeah, look, they need all help they can get. We've seen a local case, I can't remember when it was, a couple of weeks ago. A hospital got ransomed, and then the cyber criminals realized what they'd done, and they gave them back the key, say, our apologies. Here's the key to decrypt your data. But as I've been working with in the healthcare industry for many years, and there's a lot of challenges going on there. There's a lot of politics involved, so often they choose the wrong product. The other issue you brought up here is that if, when Microsoft and these other guys offering their services, it could lead to a vendor lock-in. And you mentioned here, it's only for 1 year. What's going to happen after that? Is the price going to rocket? How is it going to work? The other challenge that we see often is that maybe you don't want to be locked into one vendor. So in this case, we see, okay, we're going to have Microsoft Defender on the workstations. We'll have Trend Micro on the servers. We're going to have something else for the network. And then what happens is when a breach occurs or an incident occurs, 20 people have to jump on a call, and they got to piecemeal what just happened. And not all the information is there. It's wrong. Never lead to a conclusion. It's very, very difficult. And there's a lot of changes that happen in healthcare too, where an IT person will stay on board for a year or two and then leave. So there's a lot of turnover that happens, and the information doesn't stay local, or the knowledge transfer doesn't occur. So there's a lot of moving parts.
So, what about local and national governments giving more funding to not-for-profit hospitals and rural hospitals for cybersecurity? What about that also being a solution?
Yeah, if we look at why the importance of healthcare, obviously it's a critical infrastructure. So you need to have proper security in place, but if you don't have the resources, it's really hard to do. And as healthcare is getting much more targeted by cyber criminals because they have the money, or the hospital can go back to the local government and get the funds to pay off the ransom. And it's healthcare is perceived as a high value target because of the medical data. And of course, when cyber attacks disrupt a hospital, it could lead to delays in patient care or even health outcomes. But again, the challenge you're going to have with healthcare is that they have no budget, they got no resources, they have no time. So they're going to have to figure this part out.
All right. Final news item. More detail on Snowflake attacks. Mandiant has been investigating compromises of organizations that use the Snowflake cloud storage and analytics service. You may recall that a couple of weeks ago, news emerged of attacks on Snowflake customers. The latest report says Mandiant and Snowflake have notified about 165 firms that may have been hacked. One company that recently publicly acknowledged being hit is Pure Storage, which uses Snowflake for analytics and customer support. Stolen were names and email addresses. The Mandiant report says in most cases, it's seen the hacker used stolen credentials that had collected as far back as 2020. Terry, what did you think when you saw the Mandiant report?
My thoughts were on how the cyber criminals can exploit all this hacked data. So as you mentioned, usernames and usernames and emails. And of course, these things can be used in various ways. The biggest one's going to happen now is phishing attacks. Now with phishing attacks, now they can leverage AI to make these emails really credible. And when you start logging into these fake websites, you start giving away your username and password and possibly your two-step verification. Now that can lead to an attack on your organization and get them compromised as well. We're seeing a lot of that stuff as well on the dark web. So we do a lot of dark web monitoring for our clients, and whenever passwords leak, they get notified. But we've seen a lot of administrative accounts leak. So that's how we did an IR back in 2020 as well, where the administrator password leaked for this customer, and they got in and they're able to compromise the whole place. And because it was a legitimate login, no red flags went off, but they didn't have 2FA. So this can lead to social engineering as well. Like it's going to be very messy.
It struck me that this attacker, which Mandiant has given the name UNC5537, this attacker has been eyeing Snowflake customers for some time. It looks like the gang had been collecting stolen login credentials for several years, figuring out which ones were for Snowflake accounts, and then ravaging the customers over a very short period of time.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, that's what happened with the client a couple of years ago. Same thing. You need to make sure you got 2FA turned on all of your devices, including administrator account. Now, not just that, start looking at maybe you have some old login methods that are still enabled because there's ways to bypass 2FA. So if I'm using an older technology and I start connecting to your service and your service has to fall back to old login methods to support me, I can now bypass your advanced security. And not only that, we can also do MFA fatigue. So we can start bombing the customer's either the Authenticator app or for the SMS. And eventually the customer's going to say, hey, it's me. And once he accepts it, it allows me in. So really, you got to start doing pen testing. Look at all these audit services to help locate if you have any old methods set up still.
In one case that was investigated, the Snowflake access username and password were stolen from the PC of a contractor who was working for a customer. That contractor was using his PC not only for work, for personal use as well, and doing risky things on their computer, like downloading pirated software. And downloading pirated software is the odds are it's going to have malware. So the contractors was the one that got hacked, not the employee's PC.
And because he brought it in, it got compromised. But let me actually tell you a real story that happened to a customer in 2021. We came in to do an IR on this company. Later to find out, this business owner was so cheap. He could not even afford or didn't want to spend money on even antivirus from Best Buy. So this guy was going to torrent sites and downloading antivirus solutions. But little did he know was that antivirus solution was backdoored. And the hackers got access to his entire network. And what they did was they got access to his Microsoft Outlook client and started emailing all of his contacts. And there was an attachment of a zip file, which was encrypted, and said, by the way, hey, Howard, we're selling insurance, whatever. If you want to read your quote, here's the password to unlock the file. So when you have an encrypted file, it goes through your firewall and your anti-spam, it can't read it properly. So it's going to let it through. And because now you got the password to open up that file properly, you can run the file inside, which will infect your business. So those lawsuits that started coming in, customers were really furious with these guys. So yeah, you really need to make sure you got proper network monitoring in place, EDR at minimum in your environment, and watch out for your cloud environment. Make sure it's all protected.
And watch out for your contractors, the people who have part-time access to the family jewels.
That's it. Protect the jewel.
Okay. That's it for this week's edition. Thanks very much for being with us again, Terry.
Thanks for having me.
Links to details about news mentioned in this podcast episode are in the text version at technewsday.com. Follow Cybersecurity Today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or add us to your flash briefing on your smart speaker. Thanks for listening. Have a great weekend. I'm Howard Solomon.